Animation is great. It looks great, feels great. But if we want to be specific, if we want to be nitpicky here, Barrett, I have to call you out on this. Why is gravity going diagonally? Why is gravity at a 45-degree angle? Why is gravity? Why? That's not how gravity works, Barrett. That's not how gravity works. Hey, want to be reviewed? Just send your animations in the Professor Goo review channel in the Discord. Each stream, I'll be going over one animation, which will be randomly selected from that channel. If you happen to be in stream that day, we'll go over it and maybe even jump into a call. If you want to watch these streams live, go to twitch.tv/DylanGoo. First of all, great animation by Barrett. This is super cute. So basically, the concept of this is that it's a run cycle first and foremost, which is great, which is a very good foundation for, you know, understanding animation and stuff like that and practicing. So also the tripping animation and the falling animation, those feel really good. So what we're going to go over is, first of all, I want to say that this animation is already very good. We already have a very good, solid foundation, but there are things we can improve. So let's talk about that, right? First things first, I would say, so this run cycle is really, really good. But one thing that I did notice is that it did feel like, you know, a couple of these, she should have tripped sooner. Like this one. So we have like, I noticed that you have the leg coming up and the foot rotated, and that's great. So these are modifications that I can tell you that you're making to an original run cycle that was actually just, you know, on flat ground. So I can tell, and if I can tell, that means that, you know, there's something we can do a little better. So this pose here is great. I can see what you're doing here with the, you know, this is a slightly hurdle-like pose. But in order to actually get that pose to work more convincingly, you have to actually sort of bend the upper torso, sort of like this. And you also have to lift up this arm a little bit. Oh, maybe not quite like that. I think like the main thing is like you want to make sure you have a counterbalance. And so if you have the arm sticking out, you can counterbalance the leg sticking out because it is sticking out sideways, right? So when it does that, you want to make sure just a bit of hand. Just a bit of hand over here. And that'll be good, right? That'll already be really helpful if you can get the hand to come out a little bit. Now, I do think the torso needs to move as well. So I would recommend, personally, that the torso does lean a little bit to the right, just a little bit. But the chest can be rotated. I don't know if I can draw this correctly because it's not rotated backwards, but it's rotated sort of like along this axis, right? So like if this was sort of towards us like that, right? And so then you can have, as you can see, a slightly more natural looking pose if you were to have, you know, a higher leg here, which I think you could raise even more, to be honest. So something like that. And then you can look up reference for like hurdle racers. Like when people race hurdles, they do have a very particular pose when they jump, and I would say that would be a good reference. So like this is good, and I think it's a really good base, a foundation for the run cycle, but we do see that it has been basically edited without too much in mind. I also think that she can just jump more. So right here, if you want her to jump, if you want her to actually jump, what you would do is just a bit more anticipation, right? So right here, right there. That's what we want, right? So we want something that has a bit more of that springing buildup there. And you would have a lot more sort of anticipation there with the jump itself. Yeah, I think you could probably keep this leg lifted. That's fine. But yeah, so you have that spring up, and then you have the actual jump, and then the landing animation will be something that's slightly different as well. But that's something that we can sort of go over with more stronger poses later, because right now it's like, I think the only thing that would really change is that she would sort of reverse the pose, where she's actually lifting up this leg a little bit higher to avoid tripping. And then, you know, this arm, this back arm would actually be a little bit higher to counterbalance that. You can kind of see that here. So already we're seeing a pose that feels a bit more athletic, for example. And there's also a lot more balancing going on that is catered specifically to the motion that we're doing, right? Which is what we want. So I think like this arm could probably be pretty forward, for example. Yeah. And so that's pretty good. The trip works really well, specifically because of the fact that this animation doesn't work by default. So it's like, this is her running without the jumping. And I think in that sense, like, I know that you know that the jumping wasn't technically correct because you specifically had to adjust it to avoid the tripping. And then probably, if I were to guess, you probably came up with the tripping idea halfway through the animation. Was like, wait, hang on, actually, it's clipping through the thing anyway. Might as well have her trip. But that's just a guess. Just because it is, I've totally done that before myself. So I think the biggest thing here is, if you want this to feel a bit more convincing, first of all, because of the other ones being more sort of like jump focused, I would try to have her attempt to jump, so we have just a bit more wind up like we had before in the previous jumps, but then like have the leg get caught, which is good. It is good. So the leg getting caught would be good, but I do think you could have it just attempt to clear it just a bit more, so it's not too casual, which is just like a slight turn, a slight lifting of the leg there. But you still have it get caught. Now once it gets caught, now here's the thing. Once it gets caught here, we actually have, let's see here. This upper torso needs to react more. So the biggest thing is that there's a lot of momentum coming in from the upper torso that is basically being, that basically carries her a bit more forward. And I think what you have here is pretty good, to be honest, Barrett. I think like what this is doing is fine. I do think the back is a little bit stiff in general, but that's a small thing. Like generally speaking, I think during run cycles you can have a bit more oscillation in like the shoulder heights and stuff, for example. That'll help a little bit with the naturalness. But once you have that, regardless, this particular torso should be a bit less stiff as well. So if we were to have this, let's see, how would I do this? Should be a bit more, for the jump itself, should be a bit more hunched over because of the athleticism we talked about before, which we do want. And then once, yeah, there we go. Once it's hunched over, that's where we have a really good opportunity. Check this out. We have a really good opportunity to straighten out the torso. So let me just delete this keyframe. Straighten out the torso. So what we would see is specifically something like this. Yeah, that's good. Keep it hooked on. That's good. So it leans a little bit forward here, or it would, right here. It would lean a little bit forward here, and then it would straighten out for this frame, which shows her sort of like loss of control and her arms wanting to straighten out. And then I would actually put more emphasis on the arms themselves. So something that looks a bit more like this, perhaps, where she's instinctively protecting her face. And I would probably have her straighten her arm a little bit outwards before she hits it. And then ideally, at least try to catch herself, because most people would, right? And then maybe even just fail, and that's okay. But like that would make it help. That would help make it a little bit more natural, which would sell it a bit more. Let's see. Otherwise, it feels a bit too choreographed. So that's a small thing. These are again just small nitpicks. I think these are ways to improve it. I do see that there is like this hand right here. Like I see what you're doing with the sort of like backwards motion of the hand. So this is kind of interesting. This goes into one of my philosophies about animation, which is specific to how I self-taught myself how to animate. I never learned the 12 principles of animation. I have two different types of animation that I follow. Types of motion that I follow when it comes to animation. One is deliberate motion, one is non-deliberate motion. These are the two forms of motion that if you understand these two, you can get a classification first and foremost of how things should move and then work on it. So what that means basically is, what is deliberate motion? Deliberate motion is anything that the body wants to do, anything that has a mind behind it, any locomotion that has an intention behind it, that's deliberate motion. Non-deliberate motion is basically physics. So like the 12 principles of animation don't actually talk about this, which is kind of annoying because I think it's really important. But like it's really easy to apply because this right here, you can see why the 12 principles kind of breaks down in my opinion. This particular animation here follows the 12 principles. This follows physics because it's being like ragdolled upwards. But as a human, you actually wouldn't do that. You you would have more deliberate motion. So you would actually want to have at least, you know, one frame where the arm is like trying to catch herself, just inherently. She could fail, but like this declassifies it as something that would require follow through, and that's an important distinction, because when you have so many options in animation, if you don't have that distinction, you're going to end up, you know, you could easily animate this girl where she just has this girl DM. You can easily animate DM here as just like having ragdoll physics, but that doesn't help, right? That doesn't look good. Not everybody follows with ragdoll physics, but it would be physically accurate. It'd be accurate according to the 12 principles, all these things. But like, if you don't know how to differentiate between deliberate and non-deliberate motion, you're going to end up not applying the principles correctly, in my opinion. So that's very, very important. Here we have, oh, this is an interesting pose. So this is a cute pose. Also Barrett, hand poses. You didn't bother opening her fist, Barrett. I can tell. I know you were doing the run cycle and you're like, you know what? No one's gonna look at her fingers. It's not like you close her fist for the run cycle, and then when she fell, you just like, you know what? Who needs fingers? Nah. I mean, I guess she's a cat, so it just says pause. But yeah, I would definitely open her fingers. Open palms are better for catching yourself with. Otherwise, she's gonna break all her knuckles. So that's one thing. Gotta get the fingers. The hand poses. But yeah, so that's the main thing there. And then also this pose is great because it's a really good demonstration of how her back is broken. Okay, okay, all right, Barrett. I gotta. Again, this animation is great, but this particular pose, it blew past me for a second. But just take a look at this shape here. Okay, take a look at the shape here. How in the hell, poor DM, she needs a new spine. There you go. Let me get this in like cyan or something. I don't know. What's a good color? Yellow looks good. Poor DM and her poor spine. Yeah, so that's not good. Spines can't do that. Okay, all right, we're good. Now the main thing is, like, if you want to have the chest rotate upwards, just do that, right? Do that instead. Yeah, cat girls are built different. True. Yeah, so that's what I would say. I think this pose could be improved. Let me just show you what I would do. Let me hide this one, and I'll draw it in green. So what I would do instead is probably something like this. First of all, there is going to be an intermediate bone, technically. So I will cheat and draw that in. So it'll be more like a segment here, right, of this torso. And then you could have the segment here that is more upright. And the uprightness, I think, could be even toned down just a little bit. Look at me, drawing cubes. I love drawing cubes. Cubes are great. All right, just finish up this last cube here. There we go. So you might see something a little bit more like this. Let me get the, oh my goodness, I zoomed in the wrong way. All right, so we'll do that. There we go. But yeah, so this is a slightly more natural position, but you might notice something, which is that the arms don't really support her anymore. So that's kind of an interesting point, right? If you want her to lift up her head this high, you actually need to have, you guys ever do yoga? You could do like the cobra position or whatever, like you're stretching. You know what I'm talking about? Like cobra. This is what it reminds me of. It's like the cobra position, right? So her head would actually be quite high, like that. And so it's like, this may not look supernatural to you if you don't want it to be, you know, as high up. But what I would say is probably have like a mix of the two, where you're like, okay, if you want her to look that high up, you have to bring her all the way this high. If you don't want her to look that high up, then you try a different pose, right? The different pose would be something that is actually just a bit more toned down in terms of like this. And so her torso would actually be far less upturned here. Let's do that. There we go. Zoop. Zam. Bloppy. Bloppy doodle. I love onomatopoeia. None of that made sense. All right. We're going to do this. Nope. Wrong perspective. There we go. There we go. I got it. Got to think in 3D. By the way, this particular skill set of drawing over animations with 3D objects is not actually that easy to do, and I do recommend you guys to try it. It's something that would allow you to use reference a lot better if you guys practice this skill, because you're gonna have to interpret reference in 3D from a 2D plane, and if you can't see the 3D shape from a 2D image, then you won't be able to use the reference as effectively. So I do recommend practicing this particular skill set, by the way, just saying. Okay, so right here, I would say don't lift her head up as high. So you would have something that is a bit more like this. Yeah, just face her towards camera just a little bit. There we go. You'd have something a bit more like this, where the face would be kind of tilted forward, but she could still look, she could still look upwards, right? Depending on how you want to do the eyes there. Hello, oh wait, she doesn't have ears there. She's ears here. There we go. But yeah, so it'd be something like this, and then you could probably get away with the elbows being hopefully long enough. I think that's a testament on like what you would want to do with the rig itself and the model. But I like how you've like sort of added this longer hand pose here. So that'll help out a lot. So she can sort of lean on one direction a little bit. This really should not be green. This should be like this should be. It's just like the same green as her hair. I'm like, come on. All right. Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So that would feel just a bit more natural, I think. So again, cobra pose probably too much, but if you don't have her head as high up, then you can have her lean a little bit like that, which will feel just a bit more natural. Okay. And then we have the drop. The drop. Oh man, this is such a great animation. Okay, let's talk about this drop. This is kind of interesting because it's like this has a lot of different layers we can talk about. First of all, again, I just want to reiterate, animation is great. It looks great, feels great, but if we want to be specific, if we want to be nitpicky here, Barrett, I have to call you out on this. Why is gravity going diagonally? Why is gravity at a 45-degree angle? Why is gravity? Why? That's not how gravity works, Barrett. That's not how gravity works, right? Now, we didn't really notice it because it still feels pretty good when we see it. But like, if you actually nitpick this, you'll notice gravity's not going the right way. And that's a pretty important thing to realize. Because, if you actually were to listen to gravity, you would have a very different animation. So here's the thing, right? If you were to actually animate this the way the physics would beget, I would say that you could probably, like, what if you wanted to? Okay, we have two different options. I like this framing. This is good composition, right? But what I would say is, if you wanted to land at this particular position, here's what we need, right? We need her to actually fall from directly above, right? And so if she falls from directly above, then she'll actually be sort of like, hanging on, basically. Like, who knows exactly what you want to do, but she'd be hanging on until eventually she plops down, right? And so her plop would actually be slightly delayed because of the machine cycle. And I think like you could do that in a number of ways. You could have her actually like hang on to it, or you could have her just like, who knows? But if you don't have her land here, now this is sort of a difficult decision, right? And I can see why you compromised in a way that does make sense, because I do like the framing. So maybe that's just what you wanted to do and prioritize, and that's fine sometimes. But if you want to have a more physically accurate thing, then technically speaking, she should be, first of all, she should be behind here. I don't know how she got past the divider, but fine. She should be here, and then she should probably fall out, around here if she's like truly ragdolling. And then she would fall, and she would actually land here, as you can see. So you can see how the line the line of gravity here is going directly downwards, right? Directly downwards. So that would be technically more physically accurate. So you have two options there. And, you know, neither of them are great, but I do think if you wanted to keep the framing, you could. And if you wanted to have her up here during this, like this frame, it would not be bad to have her sort of like in this position maybe. Actually, I'll draw it in yellow. It would not be bad to have her in this position where she's sort of like grabbing on. It'd be a lot more work, but she could be grabbing on, you know, for dear life. And she's just like, please don't let me die. And then she falls, right? Something like that. But she would still have to fall in a funny way if you wanted to faceplant. But yeah, that's those are some ideas. Either one would work. What you have right now is not terrible, but I do think it doesn't make physical sense, technically. Yeah. Keisatri, you got a question about centrifugal force. That's a very good question. So centrifugal force would actually go the opposite direction, and it's not going quite fast enough, I think, to actually allow it to happen. Like if it was, then yeah, that'd be great. But washing machines, you know, they don't quite have that speed necessary, but it will help a little bit. Like I think like the centrifugal force and the dividers are ultimately what helps, you know, her stay up so long. Like she would ultimately roll off around here, this frame, and that's actually pretty good. You know, without that, she would just be sliding around on the ground the whole time, right? Because there is no real centrifugal force here. So yeah, that's the only thing. Because at the end of the day, so centrifugal force and centripetal force, if you actually think about it from a physics standpoint, they only are as powerful as each other. So like if you have, because centrifugal force doesn't actually exist, keep that in mind. It's only centripetal force that exists as a thing. Centrifugal force is actually just inertia. This is just a lesson in physics, by the way. This is just a fun lesson in physics. Centrifugal force is not a real thing. It is inertia that begets centripetal force, which is the inwards acting pressure that forces that pushes against the object, and that's what keeps it, you know, attached to it. So what you're actually doing is like if you don't have enough force pushing out into, you know, into the surface, you don't have enough force to actually stick onto the wall because you just slide off, because centripetal force doesn't exist unless you're pushing against it. But yeah. So that's what I would say. But a very good question though, because ultimately like there is enough reason to consider that when we think about physically accurate things. There's going to be cases where that's really important, right? Like inertia in general does need to be considered when you have, you know, center of mass and balance and gravity and all these things. You do need to keep that in mind. So it's a good question, but yeah. And then we have, of course, Bear just ignoring all physics and just having her stick onto the wall, which I think is fine if she was grabbing onto it. And it's pretty funny, but physically speaking, yeah, she wouldn't be sticking onto it. Now, if her fingers were, you know, claw shaped and like digging into the into the thing, I would believe it. I would believe it. But unfortunately not. So that's the only thing. Yeah, but that's honestly mostly it, because this is a really good animation already. Those are the small things. This one, like, I mean, obviously, like the last pose is just like, it's meant to be funny. It's a joke, and I think it works pretty well. I don't really mind that at all. I think everything else is pretty good. Although maybe we could talk about the tail just a little bit. This is a really cool system. It looks to me, and Barrett, correct me if I'm wrong. This is wiggle bones, I think. It looks simulated to me. But it looks like it's been baked maybe. I don't know. And then this last part looks like it's hand animated. That's my guess. If I were to guess, that would be my guess. Because the run cycle, the tail looks great. Now, I did notice that, you know, when she trips, the tail doesn't quite look as good. And we can talk about that real quick, because the tail is a really, really good example of how the physics would move an FK chain. And this is where like a lot of the non-deliberate motion sort of like comes into play. And of course, tails are sort of a combination of both, right? They have physics, and they also have, you know, intention behind it. Excuse me. Oh, so let's just draw over this tail real quick. It's a really, really simple change. I love animating tails because of how like sort of easy it can be to get good shapes. So let's talk about this. Let's get that shape in there, right? I think if you wanted to have a bit more, yeah, if we had that, we could say that the tail itself is coming in that way, right? Because it has this base is where we have a lot of that more deliberate, and then the tip is where we have more of that non-deliberate, right? So if we were to do that, I would say probably something like this could be good, because of that. As you can see, the inertia of that, the tip of the tail would be stronger, right? So it would maintain, it would fall backwards, and then it would bounce over here, where you might see it flop around, sort of like in this sort of fashion, and then you might see it like go around here, where it ultimately unfurls, kind of like how you have it there. So I think that's pretty good. And then like, oh, that's messy. And then yeah, I think the rest of it would be pretty standard because it'd be on the ground already. So that's how I would recommend animating that tail. It's a small thing. The timing is actually not perfect. I think actually this would probably come in a little sooner. Sorry about that. There we go. Yeah. Because of how the momentum works here, she stops falling at around this time. That's probably better. But you get the idea. So you can have prettier shapes here, which I do recommend. It's more of a tween. And then you would also have the timing be based on the physics itself, and try to get something that feels both non-deliberate and deliberate, because there is a mixture of both in these tail objects. Tails are tails. They're very interesting. And typically, by the way, I typically animate tails in full FK. Not everybody does that, but I can show you guys a trick today on how to animate tails very easily, quote unquote. With even with an FK chain, even though, like, you know, IK is considered so much better in some ways. For tails, I actually really like FK chains, and I'll show you guys how easy it is to animate a tail. Oh man, it's gonna be great. It'll be like 5 seconds. All right, but yeah, that's it. That's it for Barrett's animation. Honestly, I think that's really good. So yeah. So the only things really is just to have that more hurdly animation, so you have a more athletic jump and good poses there, and then of course having just a bit more of that convincing trip pose, so we have that rebalancing and then the catching of herself. Some more tail animation here that could feel a bit more natural, a more natural cobra pose that doesn't feel too much like a cobra pose. See exactly which one works better, but don't break her back, very important. And then, of course, the falling of gravity. Make sure that is going to be adhered to when you're doing your animations, if you can. But yeah, that's it. That's it. Thank you so much, Bear. This is really cool. That was good. That was really good.